Hey film fans, welcome to Movie Talk with Aaron Hunter. I'm Aaron Hunter. In 2006, a little known but well-regarded American filmmaker released a film that kicked off a now 16-year career as one of the most celebrated filmmakers in American independent cinema. Her name's Kelly Reichardt, and the film is Old Joy, the subject of this episode of What Makes This Film Great. Old Joy is not actually Kelly Reichardt's first film. In 1994, she directed a feature-length film called River of Grass, which was a very low-budget independent film, but was well regarded. It was nominated for prizes at the Sundance Film Festival and other independent film festivals, but as is often the case with women directors, female filmmakers in all of the sort of crew and craft positions, there was a long time before she was sort of able, let's say, or allowed to make another feature film again. She did spend the intervening 12 years working on shorts and in a variety of other capacities, but that was a 12-year gap. For somebody who's become, I think anyway, one of the great American filmmakers of the 21st century. I've been mentioning for 6 or 8 months now that I was going to talk about Kelly Reichardt, and so I am going to do a few episodes of What Makes This Film Great on some of her films. Probably not River of Grass, but maybe her first 3 in this sort of new Reichardt era. So Old Joy, Wendy and Lucy, and Meek's Cutoff, all very different films. Although all just absolutely fantastic. Like I did with Hal Hartley last year, I'll probably talk about her early films for now, and then maybe I'll circle back to her sometime later, and I promise I am getting back to Hal Hartley sometime soon. Old Joy is also a pretty low-budget film. It was directed by Reichardt, and the screenplay was written by Reichardt and Jonathan Raymond, a frequent collaborator of Reichardt's. He's worked on most of her scripts in the 21st century. Some of them, like Old Joy, are based on his fiction. Old Joy is based on a short story that he wrote. Same with Wendy and Lucy. Sometimes, I believe, with Meek's Cutoff, that was an original story that they worked on together. But he's a frequent collaborator of Reichardt. Maybe you get a feel for that in the films and their sense of space. Their sort of, for the most part, kind of minimal cast. And in the weight of small things, which I'll talk about in this discussion a little bit. It's also got cinematography by Peter Sillin, who doesn't have a lot of credits to his name, but, well, it's low budget and it doesn't have quite the stately weight that some of Reichardt's later films would have, but you can see Reichardt and Sillin working towards this Reichardian approach to film narrative that is very image-driven, very visual. Of course, all film is image-driven and visual, but as we get into it, I think you'll see what I mean, that Reichardt's films, they're slow. They're examples of what we might call slow cinema, and I'll circle back to that. But oftentimes when you watch a Reichardt film, if you're not used to this kind of pacing, you end up saying something like, nothing happens. I show her films to my students a lot, and that's a comment I get. Nothing really happens for the first hour. And in a sense, there's some truth to that. Old Joy features, it's about a road trip, and I'll come back to the plot in a second, but it features a lot of shots of the road in the city, of the road in that sort of suburban industrial space between the city and nature, and then of the road and nature. And it's just shots, often point of view shots, from inside the car, usually driving. You're gonna love it. And that's it. And some of them go on for 30 seconds. Some of them go on for even longer. And so if you're not used to this kind of meditative, you could even maybe call it, if you wanted to be sort of generous in this way, transcendental in the old kind of Emersonian way, sense of reverence, maybe that's too strong a word, appreciation for space, for geography, then yeah, it might seem like nothing's happening. But as I hope to show in this video, a lot is actually happening. And you can see Reichardt working towards a filmic style that she's going to develop over the next several films, where cinematography is incredibly important to her approach to narrative and character. Likewise, sound's very important in this film, and music. The music's by Yola Tengo, which is this sort of 80s, 90s alternative band, and it's mostly instrumental. And the music, the sound, and the cinematography, it's very important when you watch a Reichardt film to pay attention to how all of those things are contributing to, pushing at, prodding at, pulling at the development of the narrative. I know I say this in every video, but it's an important element of film, and it's important to me as I continue to build this channel to convey these ideas that movie is not just story. Cinema is not just story. Story's important, but cinema is. It's the cinematic arts of cinematography, editing, which Reichardt does most of the editing on her films herself. Music, sound design, off-screen space, all of these things that Reichardt seems to be a master of by the time of Old Joy, and has gotten even better at since then. The story is incredibly simple. Daniel London plays Mark, and Mark is a Gen X 30-something who is in a probably desirable life in a lot of ways. He lives in what I think is Portland, Oregon, but it's a town with bike shops, and there's discussion of indie music shops and this sort of stuff. And he lives in a nice house with a nice yard with his nice wife. She's pretty and she's pregnant, and it would seem that they're taking that next step into adulthood. You know, they're in their 30s and they have arrived. But from the beginning of the film, he seems unsatisfied. We'll come back to that in a second. And very early on, within the first couple of minutes, Mark gets a call from Kurt, who's played by Will Oldham. And Will Oldham pops up in a few Reichardt films, but this is his most prominent role. And Will Oldham's a fascinating figure in American culture. He's an actor who's on again, off again. The first time I ever saw him was as a kid or maybe a young teenager in the John Sayles film Matewan, the labor union organizing film with amazing cinematography by Haskell Wexler. I should do a John Sayles. I should talk about John Sayles. Anyhow, Will Oldham is part of the sort of 20, 30-year collective now known as Palace Brothers, Just Palace, and so on. And then sometime in the early 2000s, he changed his kind of collective, or his own name, I don't know, to Bonnie Prince Billy. And he just puts out fantastic, it's kind of like mossy, dark Americana music. Beautiful songwriting, a kind of loose but deeply musical approach to roots music that feels improvised and kind of highly practiced at the same time. And if you can ever see him in concert, I definitely recommend that you do. Anyhow, Oldham plays Kurt. And in the opening scene of the film, Mark gets a call from Kurt, and Kurt says, "Hey man, let's go up into the woods. Let's go camping for a night. I know about these cool remote hot springs. We'll go up there. We'll have a good time. I'll have you back by tomorrow night." And that's the story. These guys meet up. They go camping. They get a little bit lost, but they find the springs eventually, and then they come home. That's all that happens, really. Mark has to call home a few times. His wife is pregnant. The one scene that she's in, maybe she doesn't love that he's hanging out with Kurt, but it's never explicitly stated. But he's going to check in anyway with his pregnant wife, and He's going up into the mountains, so he's going to let her know he's safe. But basically, the whole film is these two guys in the car, at the campfire, in the tent, in the spa, and that's it. What makes it so good? Let's just have a look at the opening scene of the film. And I think you can get a sense, you'll get a sense of it being somewhat low budget, but you'll get a sense of all of the things that I was just talking about, how sound and on-screen space and cinematography and off-screen space are used, sound editing, are used to begin right from the beginning where it seems like nothing's happening, to begin to create ideas and themes that resonate throughout the film. Let's have a look. I really love this opening for a couple of reasons. First, when you get this bell ringing in this kind of off-screen space and you don't know what it is, and you get this close-up of Mark's face as he's meditating, you can probably guess that it's some kind of meditation bell. But you have here from the very beginning the image of a man who's looking for what? Serenity, peace of mind, a moment. We get shots of birds, which we're going to get throughout the film. Nature intrudes on this film in a lot of interesting ways. And that starts right at the very beginning. And there's going to be shots of birds and other animals, but mostly birds throughout the film as they're inquisitively watching what these humans are doing and how these humans are trying to get their shit together. And then we have this cut to the blender. What I love about this is that what's going to come out of this film is this notion that many people have, it's not new to this film, that the city is a place of chaos. It's sometimes decrepit, especially those border spaces between the city and country I mentioned. But there's something kind of cliche about that the film looks at also, but maybe it's not the city itself, but the choices that people make where they live and how they live within the city. And that's something that from the very beginning, the sound and the imagery is trying to get at, right? Mark is here trying to meditate, and then this blender goes off, and that may or may not interrupt his meditation, but it interrupts his meditation in the film. So in a filmic sense, it's an interruption. It's a loud and aggressive interruption. And Mark takes this opportunity when Kurt calls, yeah, I want to go camping. In part, I think, it's never stated, because he wants to find that moment. And he believes, again, it's never stated, that he's only going to find that outside of his home, which is sad, and outside of the city. And so they go. Before they can leave the city, though, first Mark and then Mark and Kurt have to run some errands. Mark has to go get Kurt, and then Mark and Kurt have to pick up a few things, including a bunch of weed that they're going to take up into the mountains with them so they can, well, not a bunch, but, enough. Happens here that I think ties the film very much into its time, but also ties Mark into a very particular type of character. Mark drives around in his car, his Volvo, listening to Air America radio. I don't know if Air America is still on. Is Air America still on? Let me know in the comments. But Air America, as you may know, was set up in the early years of the Bush administration in an attempt to sort of create a left-wing or liberal or sort of somewhere on the spectrum of left counter to Fox News and Rush Limbaugh and all of that sort of stuff. And it featured a lot of very influential left-wing commentators, as well as some sort of Hollywood types and others. And Mark drives around listening to this. This is 2006. This is we're into the second Bush administration, and there's a lot of liberal rage. If you don't remember, Bush's election was very contested, and then you have 9/11, and you have first, even before 9/11, you have Bush's tax cut, then you have 9/11, then you have the war in Afghanistan, then you have the war in Iraq, you have the Patriot Act. I mean, if you're on the left, Bush was not a good president, and there's been this softening of his image, especially in the wake of the last guy. But those were hard times to be an American lefty, and I wasn't even living in America at the time, and I was like reading The Nation and all this sort of stuff. And there's a lot of, like, I think talk radio has been replaced in a way by social media, but there's a lot of just sort of like, and so a lot of the stuff that the guys on the radio are saying, the people on the radio are talking about the economy and how it might recover and what Bush is doing and all that sort of stuff, are things that I might personally agree with, but they're doing it in this sort of heightened sense of aggro, as talk radio people do. You know, this is not a lefty thing, it's a talk radio thing. Let's just take a quick look at that.
When Reagan talked about he's for states' rights, all it was was just veiled way of saying he's a racist. When Nixon talked about law and order, that's what he was talking about. He was talking about think about this. You had Lee Atwater kicking around when all these guys were devising the Southern strategy, including Karl Rove, who's taken the Southern strategy to the next step, and that's to divide us by way of religion. So I don't think...
This is what I mean about a choice. Mark chooses this, you know, and it makes sense. Like, I'm probably roughly the age, or I was then probably roughly the age Mark was, and like I said, I'm reading The Nation. I'm getting as much info on, you know, what's wrong with Bush as I can, and my friends and I are debating this, and we're drinking beer, we're talking about Bush and what happened in Ohio and how horrible the Patriot Act is and all this sort of stuff, and it creates a kind of right, but that is a choice, and that's Mark's choice, and he's going to listen to this on and off in the early phase of the film, and then he picks up Kurt, and let's just have a quick look at Kurt's first appearance.
Hey, man!
Hey, Kurt!
Hey. I borrowed a cooler. Take it. And a wagon. And a TV.
You're looking good.
Really? I wish.
Pete hasn't sold the house yet?
No, not yet, but my days are numbered here. I'm really glad you could come. I didn't know if you could make it on such short notice. Everyone's so busy now. You know, I had a dream about you the other night where you were in like a hospital or something. I don't know, it was really weird, but you were the best thing about it by far.
That's cool.
Okay, so you see, this is the appearance of a different type of character. The sort of disheveled look, the beard, the kind of unkempt beard, the buttons misaligned. I love that. That's just such a wonderful touch. And Kurt's going to show up, and you can tell these guys go back. These guys were probably college friends, or they were party buddies in their 20s. They have a common rapport about old friends. They knew each other back then, but their lives have gone in different directions. And the purpose of this trip is in some ways to reconnect. And Kurt's going to spell that out explicitly the first night. And you can see visually by the way they're, I mean, Mark's not like prissy and prim or anything. He's kind of like a cool, chill, Pacific Northwestern Gen X 30-something guy. But he's still not, you know, his buttons are in the right buttonhole. And there are little things that happen here visually. Like, look again at how Kurt arrives with his stuff.
Hey. I borrowed a cooler. Take it. And a wagon. And a TV.
Why is he carrying his stuff that way? Then we go to his van, in which the film implies they're going to take the van, but they don't take the van. They take the Volvo because Mark's brought the dog, and now Kurt thinks there's not enough room in the van for the dog. But look at this. That to me is very interesting, that there would be an NRA sticker on the back of Kurt's van. And whatever one thinks about what the NRA is or what the NRA says it is, if you're like a lib in 2006, you're not driving around with NRA sticker on your van. So maybe that tells us something about Kurt. It never kind of comes up in the film, but does it? Maybe it tells us something about where the van came from. Maybe Kurt bought the van secondhand and never bothered taking the sticker off. Maybe it's ironic. Maybe it's a conversation piece for him. It never comes up again. It never comes up again. Except there's a feeling of foreboding in this film. It's a film that feels thriller-like. And part of the reason it feels thriller-like is because nothing happens. Part of the reason it feels thriller-like is because a guy calls up another guy and says, hey, you want to go up to this remote part of the mountains where no one else is going to be and camp with me overnight? And that's fine. If a friend of mine called me up and said, let's go camping somewhere remote, I'm there, let's go right now. I don't care, raining, cold, let's go. I want to go. I'm like, Mark, get me out of here. Not so much. But the movies have taught us if scraggy bearded, misbuttoned shirted man invites you to the woods for the night, danger is afoot. So the filmic trope of the sort of inciting incident of this film lends itself to foreboding. And maybe the NRA sticker contributes to that just a little bit. Anyhow, they head off, and Kurt smokes weed the whole time. He's constantly smoking and constantly high, which is fine by me. But that also contributes a little bit to this sense that, I don't know if it's supposed to. Maybe it is, or maybe it isn't. Maybe it's just my own weird hang-ups, although I don't think I have any hang-ups about that. Anyhow, they drive through these sort of industrial barrier lands, and then they get out into nature. And as I said, there are lots of scenes of just driving, of the trees and the road. And the two guys talk, and they have this sort of uneasy familiarity. It's clear that they were friends once, but maybe not so much anymore. Not that there's any animosity, there's just that the distance of time, the distance of having grown apart from a friend. And it's pretty clear that they once cared about each other. And the power of the film comes in its willingness to be slow, to let the feelings, as the audience discovers them, as the viewer discovers them, to let us sit with these feelings of loss, and to ponder how they got there. And so I think in part these long takes of the woods, of the birds, of when they get into the woods, of scenes of nature, are just part of the slowness and the stillness of Reichardt's filmmaking, but they're also the silences that occur, that exist between these two men who want to connect, particularly Kurt, but who have forgotten how, who've lost the spark.
How you feeling? Good. I feel good. How about you? Feel good too.
And so Kurt's convinced that he knows where these springs are, and they're going to drive up near the springs and camp that night so they can hike up to them the next day. But they're off the beaten track and he can't remember where they are exactly. Maybe because he's stoned all the time. I'm not judging. And Mark begins to wonder, like, do you know where we're going? And he's like, yeah, man, I know exactly where we're going. It's around here somewhere. Again, this leads to that sort of, do you know where we're going? Are we going? Is something going to happen? There's a foreboding, and it runs throughout the film. And it's compounded by Mark. Daniel London's performance, the power of his performance in this film is almost all in expression. His facial responses to Kurt are almost always doubtful or side-eyed or suspicious. Now, it may be that he's just trying to figure his friend out. Who is this guy? Who has he become? But they appear, at least the way they're shot, at the angle his face is, at the way his expression looks, and just the sort of performer in general, they look like, I don't dig this scene. I don't trust this guy. Again, I may be misreading that. It's a sort of Kuleshov effect of Mark's expressions. But that also contributes to your sense of, like, what's gonna go wrong on this trip? What goes wrong is they get lost, and there's some great scenes, some great use of the film to show them getting lost and not knowing where they're going. One of my favorites is just a little scene. There's no conversation, there's no sort of exposition or explanation, you just get this.
I remember that.
Right? It's awesome. And eventually they break out the map. When they stop to look at the map, Mark gets a call from his wife, Tanya. And look at how it's filmed.
Go! It's the mother of your child.
Thank you.
I have no idea. No, it's fine. We just have no idea where we are.
I think this is very important. There'll be a similar scene later, not exactly the same, because Mark walks away from Kurt, and it's clear that there is a barrier. It's invisible. We see Mark over there, right? There's no barrier, but there is. This is his private life, his personal life, his dad life, or soon-to-be dad life, his adult life, his married life. And back here is something, it's his friend life, but it's also his youth, his past, his little boy life, something like that. And the way that's filmed works really well. And it also keeps us out of the conversation. So we don't actually know what he's saying or what he's telling Tanya about the trip or what he's telling Tanya about Kurt. And they start looking around and they realize they're not gonna make it. They don't know exactly where it is. Kurt's pretty sure it's nearby, but it's getting dark. So they decide to camp and they walk into the woods and they find this.
Well, might as well stay here, I guess, right? Still get a good start in the morning.
Looks fine to me.
Lucy, stay here.
I think this is a very important moment because it goes back to something I was saying earlier about the kind of typical city-country dichotomy that's often used in film and in other forms of narrative. The city can be a place of peace and calm depending on the choices that someone makes, just as the countryside, nature, can be a place of ill use and litter and garbage and trash and human refuse, depending on the choices that people make about how to use it. And that's the campsite that these guys come across. But they make do, they start a fire, and they sit around the fire, and this is kind of the first sort of big set piece of Kurt's attempt at getting close with Mark. And they have a few conversations about what they've been up to. Kurt's been taking night classes, he's stoned, he talks about his understanding of physics, which is tenuous, but I think makes sense to him. And then they have this short conversation.
I miss you, Mark. I miss you really, really bad. I want us to be real friends again. There's something between us, and I don't like it. I want it to go away.
Man, what are you talking about? We're fine.
Are you serious? Do you really think that?
Of course. Of course I do. We're fine. We're totally fine.
I don't know. God. God, I'm sorry. I'm just being crazy. I'm sorry. I'm just being crazy. I know. Don't pay any attention to me, okay? We're fine.
Now, to me, there's a lot going on here, and all of it's tragic. First, Kurt wants to make a connection. He wants to reestablish his friendship. He is quite literally lost. He's lost in his life. He's probably living out of his van, although he implies he has his house. He looks like he doesn't take care of himself. Maybe he's lying about the night classes. It's hard to tell. He certainly, we get these snippets of conversation, has been traveling a lot and hanging out at festivals and communes and places like that. The kind of things that a seeker does, but also the kind of things that a lost person does. And he's lost, and here's his friend Mark. And Mark blows him off. And that's bad enough. But I think Mark also wants the connection, but has become too gentrified. Like, he's a gentrified person. He's bricked over that part of himself that at 25 would have used that opportunity, Kurt's offer. He would have used that opportunity to aim for an emotional reconnection. But instead, he brushes it off. And then Mark sees that he's brushing it off. And then Kurt sees that he's brushing it off. And they both end up with nothing. And so they go to sleep. The next day they find the springs. They have to hike up quite a bit, and they've got their gear. And there's some more great shots of nature. This great shot of this sort of northwestern jay followed by a slug. I don't know what that contrast is meant to be, but I leave it to you. And they get to the springs, and they find, Kurt has been there before, and they find that there are these individual tubs, and they have to fill up the tubs with hot water from the hot springs themselves. And they do this, and there's this nice kind of like, you got to work for it. You got to hike up there. You got to fill it up yourself. And then finally, you get to sit in the tub. And then something very interesting happens. Kurt gets high again. They're drinking some beers. They're sitting there. Mark is like, you can tell Mark's like, yes, this is the place that I want to be. It's been worth it. The uncomfortableness, the getting lost, the hanging out with my kooky friend who I don't know if I get anymore. He got me here. And then Kurt tells another story. And it's a story about his bike and an accident. And I'm just going to play it.
Then I've got a stretch, before I get to the notebook store. So I'm like, okay, I can finally move on with my life. Not have this guy. Go down to the notebook store, look for my notebook. It's like 20 blocks. Go look for my notebook, come up to the cash register, and I'm buying the notebook. And the automatic doors open, and I look up, and the guy's like walking right into the store, right in front of me. And I just can't believe it. And then the cashier woman, I hear her talk to me all of a sudden. She's like, superstar. What? And I look at her, and she's this Indian woman, maybe like 50-year-old Indian woman with glasses and a dot on her forehead. And I was like, what? And she said, Jesus Christ superstar. You said Jesus Christ. And I was like, no, I didn't say Jesus Christ. I looked at the bagging guy, and it's like, did I say Jesus Christ? He's like, just shrugs. And she's like, it's okay. But it felt like, I feel like I would have known if I had said Jesus Christ. I would have heard my voice in my memory like, Jesus Christ. Kurt said Jesus Christ. So I was still shaking my head. I was like, I feel like I'm going crazy. And I'm still sort of tense and everything. I feel like I'm going crazy. She's like, it's okay. You're not crazy. It's okay. And she was really nice. And right when she said that, this dream that I'd had just yesterday morning just flashed on me, because the same lady, the cashier lady, was in the dream doing the same thing, basically. I wasn't in a store, but I was really upset about something, really totally depressed about something, and she just put her arms around me and said, it's okay, you're okay. Sorrow is nothing but worn out joy.
The previous night, when Kurt was trying to connect with Mark, it was all about himself. He was talking about himself, as you would, and he's making a very direct appeal. But here he's telling this story, and the story has it's kind of like a tale or fable, and it has this sort of aphorism that comes at the end, sorrow's nothing but worn out joy. And that, to me, feels like a moment of connection that they couldn't have had if they hadn't gone through all of the awkwardness, because all the stuff we've seen with Mark is also, there's a sorrow to him. And I think both of these men, in very different ways, and in ways that makes it hard for them to connect, are sorrowful and are looking for joy. And they find it in this brief physical moment. Kurt's out of his tub, and he walks over to Mark and starts to give him a massage.
Hey, what's going on?
Just relax, man. Just settle in.
All right.
this moment is key. It's so rare in American cinema to get a scene of men expressing platonic physical affection. It's so rare in American life for men to express platonic affection physically with each other. And Mark knows that, which is why he tenses up, which is why he's like, what's going on here, man? Which is the last moment in the film where, you know, American movies has led us to believe, okay, finally, here comes the psycho bit. Here comes the rape bit. Here comes the, I'm going to cut your throat bit or whatever. But no, it's not that. It's definitely not that. It's nothing other than Kurt wanting a connection with his friend, and here they are, and he's unburdened himself with this story, and now he gives his friend a massage, and his friend tenses up. And we get that shot of his wedding ring, which I think is great, as he says, okay, I can be here. And it's wonderful, and it's fleeting. It's a fleeting feeling. And then they leave. And I've spent a lot of time going to sort of bathhouses and spas, especially when I lived in Hungary. And this is them walking back out of the woods. Again, this could be Kuleshov stuff. I might be reading into it, but that walk to me is the joy. That's that feeling of, man, we walked, we hiked, we lugged buckets, we went through this, and then we sat in this hot water and we got the massage and we soaked our troubles away. We soaked our sorrow away for a little bit. And when you get out of that hot water and you cool off and then you walk in nature, you feel your spirit lifted. And I think that the shots of them walking capture that for me. I might just be reading into it, but they do. And then we cut to them heading home. And one of the things I love about it, if you think about all those scenes of them driving through the woods, of the long, open, empty road of trees and tarmac and nothing else, and then we get this. There are other people in the world. And then, I'm not going to totally spoil the end, but I'm going to walk you right up to the end. Mark drops Kurt off, and what does he do?
Later, love. See you. See you, Kurt.
Not enough to take care of the new people who come along every year to join the labor force or to rejoin it. And it doesn't take care of the sharply higher cost of necessities. It's one thing to say inflation appears under control in the aggregate, but when you
turns that goddamn radio back on and just re-immerses himself in the angst. You know, you gotta let that go. It's a Sunday, man. Let it go for the rest of the night. Go home. Cuddle with your wife. Listen to Prairie Home Companion or whatever was going on back then. This American Life. Hang out. Feel the chill, but Mark can't do it. And that's what I meant at the beginning of this video about choices. Even though Mark probably considers himself a with it guy, and he probably is, he's got it going on. He's got the job, he's got the wife, he's got the baby on the way that he says he's very excited about. He's got the house, he's got it all. But he chooses to dwell in the space of anger. going out to nature for him is a momentary salve, and it's not the relief that he wants it to be, because he doesn't let it be. He chooses to re-immerse himself in the sorrow. And that is the touching thing about the film, I think. And Kurt also, we find out, and I'll let you watch the film and see the ending, which is open and implies a lot of things about Kurt, but neither of them are happy because of this experience, even though I do think they find joy eventually within the experience. And that is the sort of tragedy of the film. And it's also a beautifully reflective concept to consider, as the credits roll at the end. Thanks for watching, everybody. My name's Aaron Hunter. This is Movie Talk with Aaron Hunter. If you've watched this far, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, share this video with a friend. I'll be talking about Wendy and Lucy pretty soon. It's a fantastic Kelly Reichardt film, the one she made after this. And stay tuned for that. Thank you so much for watching. Keep watching movies.